everybody. It's Monday, September 21st, and that means it's time for another episode of Chatting with Agnes and Cecilia. I'm one of your co-hosts, Cecilia Sept. I'm the principal and founder of Rogue Tulips Consulting, which is the sponsor of our weekly web series. And I'm here today with my friend and co-host, Agnes. I'm going to throw it to Agnes to say hello and introduce herself.
Thank you, Cecilia. My name is Agnes Amos Coleman. I'm an author and a consultant. And good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to our global audience, wherever you're watching us from. Over to you, Cecilia.
Great. Thank you, Agnes. And in keeping with our international flavor this fall, today we have guests from the United Kingdom, Paul Reddish and Barbara Regnier. So we're going to ask Paul to introduce himself first.
Hi, Cecilia and Angus. I'm Paul Reddish. I'm the Chief Executive of Volunteering Matters, who are a UK-wide volunteering organisation, been leading a lot of the response to the pandemic here in the UK. And
Barbara?
Hi, I'm Barbara Regnier, and I manage a small project for Volunteering Matters, which is called Hounslow Allies, and we match children in care with volunteers.
Oh, well, that sounds like a wonderful program. So let's just jump right into today's topic, which is a strategic approach to volunteering during a pandemic. So, Paul, we're going to throw it over to you. What have you seen that has changed a lot or significantly, in your opinion, during the pandemic when it comes to volunteering?
Well, I think we're still trying to find that out in a lot of senses. I mean, there's been a lot of claims made about, you know, the significant impact and change that the pandemic's had on volunteering. But I'm not sure there's evidence behind a lot of those claims. And I'll explain very briefly what I mean by that in a moment. But essentially, this pandemic created a set of conditions that we've never seen before in our lifetime. So you had a situation where as the whole nation went into lockdown, unless you were an NHS, National Health Service worker, or a key worker, the only reason by which you could go out of your house was to help somebody else through volunteering. And otherwise, people were pretty much stuck in their house. It was pretty much the only other exception. So, and there's all this messaging, quite rightly, about the need to support the health service at a time when they'd be strained. And there was a good, outpouring of goodwill, and everybody wanted to do their bit to support. So we had these quite unique conditions at the start in March as we went into lockdown, where everybody wanted to do something. The only something they could do, unless they were paid to do it as a health worker, was to get out and help aspects of their community that might have been shielding. And as such, you had a whole load of people come forward wanting to do little bits to be able to help out. And I've heard since, people say, well, there's been a huge surge of volunteers, this sense of activism that hasn't been there before. That's the bit I'm more nervous about. I think what we don't know yet is whether all the people that would have been volunteering before, and there were over 13 million in the UK prior to COVID, the same ones that then went out and helped their communities, but couldn't go and volunteer in their local charity shop or at their local homelessness shelter because it was shut, or indeed whether there has been a surge of new people. So I think we're still trying to find out precisely what's happened in terms of the population and interest in volunteering and supporting neighbours, and how much of that was happening beforehand versus now, and whether it was really a surge of new people wanting to help, or indeed whether it was the same people that have always helping in the only single way they could during lockdown, as opposed to all the magnificent things that people do in causes throughout the UK prior to the pandemic. I think it has had an impact in terms of the importance and understanding of volunteering and community support amongst politicians and influencers, though. And I think we need to make sure that we don't confuse the two. So rather than there being a surge of new volunteers, I would call it a surge of political interest in volunteering. And what volunteering can and should do for communities, and how people can come together to support in a way that governments and statutory partners can't. And for me, that's the bit that has happened. All of a sudden, those of us that have said for the last decade, 2 decades, however long, volunteering is the lifeblood of communities. That gift of time is the single biggest thing that anybody can give. And that support that somebody feels from the mutual aid that comes from it, or indeed just the idea that somebody would want to give up their time to support them, has been the bedrock of communities and improving for years and years and years. And I think what the pandemic has done is given volunteering a showcase and helped those in positions of influence realize just how important people giving up their time in communities is to the social fabric of the UK. So that bit I do think has changed as a result of COVID. I'm just not sure yet that there's proof to show that there's a huge interest in many more people volunteering.
So it sounds like, Paul, that you think it might be the same people who were volunteering before, but maybe volunteering in different ways or in different places?
Maybe. I think what I'm saying is I don't think there's evidence one way or the other yet. So I think what's been said too early is that there's a surge of new volunteers. I'm not saying there is or isn't. I'm saying that the conditions around COVID were such that you know, a huge amount of people that were volunteering beforehand wouldn't have been able to volunteer. And what we don't know yet is that, or you know, what the demographic of these individuals were in communities that were out volunteering. How many of them were already active in their communities versus new? And that's a piece of work we need to do. If you just look at the sheer numbers for a minute, Cecilia, to say, you know, 13 million people volunteering across sports clubs, community centres, arts projects throughout the country, that is a huge amount of people that overnight in lockdown would all of a sudden not been volunteering. And that's why it's dangerous and early to say, you know, this is a whole new set of activism in communities. I think it may well be that there was, you know, a large number of people volunteering for the first time in the pandemic. It may well be that it was all the people that were volunteering before. It might be somewhere in between the two. But as yet, that analysis has not been done.
Interesting perspective. So Barbara, what's your take on that, what Paul just said? Do you feel the same way? Do you see the same thing happening with what you're working on?
Well, it's quite interesting. I work very locally, and I've just had a recruitment drive over the summer, and quite a lot of people who have come to me saying they're interested in volunteering had applied to volunteer in COVID, as a response to COVID, but didn't get asked to volunteer. There was nothing for them to do. So I think my opportunity then locally just happened along, and they thought, fantastic, an opportunity to volunteer, and they were quite frustrated. I mean, that they couldn't help with some of the other initiatives that had taken off. But I think Paul's probably right. I mean, he is right in a sense that we don't know enough. And I think all my years in volunteering, it does tend to be the same people or the same groups of people who do volunteer, whatever. I think we might have seen new volunteers, whether as sustainable or not, is another issue.
Yeah, are you going to keep their attention once the pandemic's over? The major driver.
Exactly.
That's a really good point. So Agnes, did you have any comments or questions on this so far?
Yeah, I kind of just want to take a different view on this. And my question to you, Paul, would be, you know, what is the value of aligning volunteers to organization's strategic goal? Because I think that there is the importance of doing this because what we don't want to do is a mismatch in people's, you know, organizational goals and the volunteer that comes along with them. So I think I really want to hear your take on this, what the value is.
It's an interesting one. I mean, you know, those of us that have worked in sort of civil society and charities, not-for-profits for some time, you know, the volunteers have been for years the lifeblood of charities and community activism. But over the years, the sector has grown in its impact and understanding, and you know, more and more that you know, small organizations that were reliant on volunteers, you know, they may be reliant on staff as well, and you know, some organizations have got much bigger. And you know, the challenge I think for organizations is to ensure that sort of deep-rooted sense of volunteers and time commitment and the importance of that in a charity's mission stays true. And the best charities do that, but I think some do get a little bit lost sometimes and caught up in turnover and income and staffing and projects and contracts and this, that and the other. And actually, and Barbara heard me talk about this a lot in the context of our organisation, which, talking about turnover and projects for a minute, it's a significant organisation. It's got hundreds of projects. But the thing that I obsess about constantly is not how many projects we've got or how much money we turn over or where the contracts are, but what are we actually doing, and what difference does that make to the communities they're in, and how many people are involved in it, and how engaged are they, and what are they doing to further the 3 or 4 things that we've set out to do in our mission. And volunteers are critical for that for us. And if we get that bit right, that means everything else works. And I do worry sometimes our sector perhaps gets that the wrong way around, because volunteers are, if you can align that to your mission, critical to the delivery of everything. And they're also the first people that see both the opportunities and the needs in the communities that you operate in, because they are part of that community. So that sort of sense of how people that give up their time are front and central to your organization's mission, your decision making, what you do, and how you go about things, for me is a non-negotiable, really. Easy for me to say, I guess, as an organization built around volunteers, but it is something that I think is critical to the sector. And I hope, as whether they are new volunteers, existing volunteers, repurposed volunteers, or whatever else, that sense of the importance of volunteers and volunteering is held true to the sector, and that charities and not-for-profits continue to engage in that.
So, Paul, have you been speaking with colleagues outside the UK about this topic? And if so, have they been seeing a similar trend? Is it a surge? Is it not a surge? What's their opinion?
Yeah, so I mean, the picture's reasonably similar in a lot of spaces. So we're part of a network called Volunteer Europe, which is effectively a membership body for voluntary-led organisations in Europe. And actually, my predecessor's the chair of that, so we're quite actively engaged. They've convened a number of sessions with partners across 14 countries in Europe. And the sense I get from those conversations, it is very similar. A huge interest in volunteering at the start of the lockdown in their respective countries. Everybody's reported a sense of, actually there's more people come forward than perhaps things to do. And a sort of a bit of a scratching of the heads of, well, what do we do with all these people that want to help at a time when you're actually locked in your houses? And then sort of coming out of that as sort of, the economy and society gets started again, what are we left with in terms of, people that can engage because they haven't necessarily gone back to work, services restarting. So I think we're all going through that challenge in slightly different ways. I think the thing that's different from country to country for me is the infrastructure. And this comes back to what's been invested in over the years. And what you've seen is, the countries that have a really good, strong civil society and voluntary sector have had the infrastructure to be able to respond to this and continue to respond to it. And actually, the ones that struggled are the ones that haven't had a strong civil society or investment in it over the years. And what we're seeing now is you've got, back to sort of the interest of politicians and decision makers, I think they're starting to see the importance of the voluntary sector's infrastructure in being able to capitalize on community activism and a want to get involved. And indeed the opposite in terms of how difficult it is if that infrastructure is not there and supported to be able to do its work. So I hope that will be a good lesson for politicians and leaders out of this, is that, it's what you invest in peace times or outside of pandemics that enable you to be able to respond so well when you really need the voluntary sector.
Absolutely.
That's an excellent point, and I hope that they take it to heart if this episode actually crosses their screen at some point, because I agree with that. We're already down to our last 2 minutes, believe it or not, so it's been great conversation, and we really love hearing viewpoints from outside the United States, so we appreciate that. So before we close, Barbara, what is your closing thought that you would like the audience to take away?
Well, I think volunteering will happen, whatever you call it, wherever it is. It will just continue, and it should continue, and we won't stop it. I don't think we can make it necessarily happen, but we can put things in place to stop, to enable it to happen better. We can, we can encourage it, we can support it. We don't have too much control, because people are people at the end of the day, but we can make it a better experience for people, and we can support people. And that's why you need, I think, volunteer management.
Oh, I love it. That's a great thought. And then, Paul, what is the one thing you would like people to take away today? What thought? And then how can they get in touch with you if they'd like to connect later?
Okay, so if I would say the three different answers to this, depending on the three different types of audience. If you are somebody that's in a community and you're a volunteer or you've got involved, it's really important that you find the things that matter to you, but also you find the causes or organizations that can enable you to do the things that you care about in your community. They're the best sorts of volunteering opportunities. To the organizations that have been involved in COVID and coordinating volunteers at a time when it's been really difficult, keep going. I mean, we're all exhausted at the moment, but we're needed more than ever. And it's important that we continue to provide that infrastructure and safe space for people to come and support communities. And for those that have an influence on being able to help support the sector, I think it's demonstrated that not-for-profits and civil society are so critical in times like this, that we all now need to go away and review what we do next, and how, whether it's I think in the context of emergencies, yes, there's a pandemic, but whether it's a flood or a natural disaster or something else, this is when the sector and communities and volunteers comes forward. And we've got to look at the learnings from this in how we can better respond going forward in the role of volunteers. If people want to contact me or follow my further ramblings on volunteering, then probably the best place is to do it on Twitter. My Twitter handle is @Paul_Reddish, and you can find me there.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And then Agnes, any closing comments you'd like to share?
No, I think it's been a wonderful and fantastic conversation, even for our membership associations, in terms of the volunteer being the bedrock of what we do, and how we need to continue to engage our volunteers and strategically, obviously, align our goals to what our volunteer needs, and vice versa as well. So I think this has been a great discussion, and definitely Paul would like to have you and Barbara back someday soon to continue this conversation. So we appreciate your time. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
That's great. And I echo what Agnes just said. It's a very interesting time, and volunteering is important across all different kinds of organizations. So this is to be continued. So, but for now, unfortunately, we have to go rogue for this week. We'll be back next week with another episode. If you'd like to learn more about Rogue Tulips, you can check us out at roguetulips.com. We've just released our first paper, Nonprofit Organizations Respond to COVID-19, and that's a download as a service to the community if you'd like to check that out. We also encourage people to check out the 501c League, which is a virtual organization for everyone in the nonprofit community and the people who love them. You can check them out at the 501cleague.net. So in closing, as Agnes and I like to say, take 15 minutes and talk to somebody, because you might learn something. So until next week, we want to thank Paul and Barbara and Volunteering Matters for all they're doing for people in the UK and for sharing their information with us today. So until next week, bye everyone.
Bye.
Bye.